Yes, so today's class, as I just mentioned, we'll continue with the problems. So we'll continue with the next problem. Okay, one of the concepts that we had discussed, we'll try to make use of that concept in order to solve this problem. So you can take down the problem statement. It is about a concentric spring. Now we have to find out uh, the axial force and the design of each spring. That is, being concentric, there are two. So what will be the axial force, the wire and the mean coil diameters of the each spring, and the number of active coils that has to be placed in each and every spring for the given application. Okay, I think we can start discussing this problem now. So what is that first word that we find? It's a concentric spring. So when we say concentric, you will immediately understand what type of application it is with the theory that we have discussed. So concentric spring means one spring inside the other. Okay, so if I roughly put this as a larger spring. Okay, oppositely wound you have a smaller spring inside it. Now the frame of reference is same, so it is bottom is same. Concentric spring is used for an aircraft engine, exert a maximum force of 4 kilonewton. So F is around 4 kilonewton under a deflection of, so Y is given of 30 mm. Both the springs have same free length. Both the springs have same free length, solid height, and are subjected to a shear stress of 600 megapascals. So same free length, same solid height, and same shear stress. So though the sizes are different, see for example the concentric spring means definitely the diameters, one has to be larger and one has to be smaller, right? Because they share the same axis. In order to share the same axis, they both have to be different sizes. In spite of their sizes being different, they both have the same free length. Okay, we saw an earlier case where the free length was different for different springs, but now in this problem both have the same free length. So you can write LF1 is equal to LF2. Okay, so let the outside be the first spring and the inside be the second spring. So LF1 and LF2 are equal, though we do not know what is that length. Okay, we'll find out. Then tau is remaining the same for both, 600 megapascals. Then we have the spring index for both springs is 6. So C is nothing but equal to C1 equal to C2 equal to 6. G is given to be 82.7 directly given. Okay, diametrical clearance is equal to the difference between the wire diameters. Now this is one proof of concept that we saw in one of the previous problems. You might remember we did that derivation. That diametrical clearance is equal to the difference between wire diameters. So in such a case, which property will hold good? So in such a case, which property holds good? Okay, in such a case, we know that d1 by d2, the reciprocal, that is the d1 by d2, that is the ratio of the wire diameters, will be equal to c by c minus 2. So this is one property that we can immediately identify, because the diametral clearance is equal to the difference between wire diameters. In such a case, then this should be true. Okay, what you are supposed to determine, what is the axial force? When we say axial force, that simply means the force acting on each of the springs. Now, say the total force is F. Now this condition is concentric. Now, what kind of combination it is? Is it a series combination or parallel combination?
It's a parallel combination.
Exactly, yes. So since it's a parallel combination, then you can write F is equal to F1 plus F2. And Y is 30, so it's both the same, that is Y1 and Y2 are both the same, 30. Whatever one spring is deflecting, the other will also deflect by the same amount. Also you have tau is also equal to each other, that is tau 1 is equal to tau 2. Both the end result is the shear stresses in both the springs is same. So subjected to a shear stress of 600 megapascals. Now let us write what we know and what we can find out from this. Okay, so we know that F1 is equal to F is equal to F1 plus F2. The total load is 4 kilonewton. So what we can write over here is 4 into 10 raised to 3 equal to F1 plus F2. Okay, so let us write some of the concepts here. That is tau 1 is equal to tau 2. What is tau in effect? It is 8fdk by pi d cube is tau. I'll write it on both the sides because we are dealing with F1 here, D1 here, D1 and K1. And this is also equal to F8, F2, D2, K2 by pi D2 cube. Now, which are the common terms here? Of course, the scalar quantities you can directly cancel out. Then, what about K1 and K2? Is it the same? Since K is totally dependent on what should be C, and since C is same to be 6, then you can cancel out even K1 and K2 because they both will have the same values. So all equal here implies K1 is also equal to K2. That is the stress correction factor due to the curvature effect or a simple stress correction factor, both will give you the same value, whichever one you take, because C is the same, because both are dependent on C values. What about other things? Still you can simplify this. We know that C is 6, so you can write F1 into 6 times D1 by D1 cube equal to 8, sorry, not 8, F2 into 6 times D2 by D2 cube. So D1 and this one here becomes square, D2 and this here becomes square. So this will get cancelled out again here. So what you are left with? So you are left with F1 by D1 squared must be equal to F2 by D2 squared. Now I can write F1 by F2 must be equal to D2 by D1. No, sorry, this is D1 by D2. D1 by D2 whole square. Correct? Okay, we came here across here like this, F1 by F2, D1 by D2. Now what is D1 by D2? Just find out its value because you know what is 6. So D1 by D2 using this equation you'll get D1 by D2 1.5. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That is 6 by 6 minus 2. So it is 1.5. Yeah. So what is this D1 by D2? Ratio you know, though you do not know the individual value. So 1.5 the whole square. So you should get F1 is equal to 2.25 times F2. F1 is 2.25 times F2. So substitute this, okay, substitute this star over here. Substitute. What happens here? Okay, so the left hand side becomes, right hand side becomes F1 as 2.25 times F2 plus F2 equal to 4 into 10 raised to 3. So solving this, you should get what is F2 and F1. What are the forces, that is actual forces on each of the spring.
Sir, F2 is 1.23 kilonewton and F1 is 2.76 kilonewton.
Yeah, yes, correct. So I'll write it in the next slide here. Solving there, you are going to get F1 as I don't have a separate value here. Hold on, I directly did it. Yeah, 1 point. How much you said about F1?
So yeah, 2.76 and F2 is 1.23.
1.2, yes, correct. 1.23. Okay. So F1 and F2, we got the axial forces. Once we got the axial forces, now we are free to understand what is D1 and D2. The second part of the question is find the wire diameter and the mean coil diameters of each spring. So we will solve that. We know tau1 is equal to 8F1 D1 K1 divided by Did you write the formula wrong that time? Or pi it is now? Okay. Yeah. Pi d1 cube. Yeah, correct. So tau 1, you know it as 600 must be equal to 8. F1 is 2.769 to 10 raised to 3 multiplied by this is 6 times d1. So keep it as it is. K1 you can immediately find out equal to K1 equal to K2, whatever it is 4C minus 1 by 4C minus 4 plus 0.615 by C. So with the C as 6, it will come around 1.2525. Pi D1 cube. So D1 gone here. So D1 will be how much? Square root. So how much you are getting?
So 9.38.
Yes, 9.38. Go for the standard value. According to the table.
So 9.5.
Yeah. So we'll have 9.5 mm as a standard value. Now you can find out what is tau, that is tau 2, and then find out d2, or you can use the relationship here also, that is d1 by d2 is 1.5, or I can say d2 being smaller, so it should be d1 here, yeah, d1 by 1.5. How much it comes?
So 6.33 millimeter.
Yes, 6.33 mm. Here standard value. But if you take tau, you'll get a slightly varied value here. You see 8 because 8 f2 d2 k2 by pi d2 cube. If you do that in a similar way, maybe your D2 should be around 6.2, 6.24 something. With this standard value will come out to be 6.3. Okay, very close to what this is, 6.3. Though this was a ratio.
So, but from 6.3, then we might have to take 6.5, right?
Yeah,
Because
6.5 will be a very big deviation from what is being told in the problem.
I mean, in the table, it's just 6.30. If you get 6.3, then I can stick with it. Otherwise, if we get 6.33, then we'll have to take a higher value of 6.5, no?
Yeah, so what we can do is we'll stick with this tau value. The reason being the problem here, both are subjected to a shear stress of 600 MPa. Okay, and this anyway is just a a dimensional thing. But what we want to satisfy is whether it is going to take care of the shear stress. And if you take 6.33 as diameter, suppose you back substitute this here and recalculate this, then tau 2 will be, what will happen to tau 2? Tau 2 will be slightly lesser than 600. Okay, so there are two values here. I think we can take 6.3 itself. 6.3 itself we can take. And anyway, 9.5, that 6.33 we got is already, look at this, it is already a adjusted value of 9.38. Suppose say you take 9.38 by 1, what you did here was 9.5 divided by, so how you got 6.33 is 9.5 by 1.5. Correct. Suppose say we took the actual value of 9.38, then this would definitely come a little bit lesser, right? Within the bounds of 6.3. What do you say?
Yes, sir. Actually, if we take the 9.398 value, right, we get the same value that we get from tau. So, if we already use an approximated value, then it will obviously lead to more deviation. So,
yes. So I think it is safe to say that 6.3 will satisfy our answer and 9.5. Though it is not exactly accurate, because once we select the standard value, some deviation is expected. And but at the same time, whatever value you are choosing, see that it does not exceed, see, the allowable shear stress or subjected to a shear stress allowable. See that this tau value, whatever selecting, should be either equal to or lesser than 600. So definitely by slightly increasing the diameter, this will come to around maybe 590, 595 or so. So that should be fine with us. Okay, you can adjust these values, not an issue. Okay, you can justify that if you take the standard value here 9.5, of course it becomes more, but if you take 9.38 by 1.5, this will come close to whatever we are getting from 600, this calculation itself, because F2 we have adjusted, no, based on that itself, D1 by D2. So because of that we are getting around this value. So in this particular problem, I think it is safe to say that D1 as 9.5 and D2 as 6.3 is good enough values for us. Now with this in mind, then immediately you can find out what is a coil diameter, 6 times D1 here, and this is D2 equal to 6 times D2. That should come around, one is 57 whole number, and this will be 37.8 mm. So next part of the question was, what is the number of active coils? So that is a direct substitution of the equation itself. Now one very important thing you have to notice, since free lengths are the same, okay, we have LF1 equal to LF2, fine, you can find out later, but it is not asked here, fine. It also implies that Y1 is also equal to Y2. correct? Whatever deflection occurs in the first spring, it should also occur in the second spring. Both have the same free length. Okay, even if it is not mentioned, you can understand that since free lengths are the same, then deflections also should be the same. So with this in mind, you can write this is y1 and y2. You can write as 8f_d cube by g d to the power 4, the general equation that we had, into I. Okay, so this is for y we had. What you have to do is, once you put for y1 with I1 with respective subscripts, y1 is 8f1 d1 cube I1 by g d1 to the power 4, and y2 similarly is 8f2 d2 cube, sorry, yeah, I2 by g d to the power 4, or you can use the same value of c is equal to 6. We can use c cube formula also, and for both these cases we know y1 and y2, this both are equal to 30. So putting 30, you should be able to find out I1 and I2. So you can just do the calculation. So this should come to around 4.9 coils, and this should come around 7.4 coils with the given thing. Okay, you can just calculate and confirm. You're getting similar values, students?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, fine. Okay. So this is how you can use a property of the proof of concept, that is diametrical clearance is equal to the difference in the wire diameters. With that, one of the property can be directly used in order to arrive at the answer. And we have also already understood the concept of free length and so on. Okay, and with respect to concentric springs. So when reading the problem, you have to be careful what kind is asked and what is the deflection associated with that. Okay. So one more problem we'll just see. It is a different one, that is, till now we had used only static load. Now what if we use a little bit of dynamic load? Okay, what will be the dynamic load concept? That is varying load. We know in actual practice all problems are subjected to varying load, especially the suspension. I'll just take down a very small statement, but we'll understand how it works here. Okay. So here we have a typical problem where a load on a steel helical compression spring varies from 500 to 1200 newtons. So we do not know what exactly is the variation, but let us assume that, okay, let it be somewhat like this. So this is the 0th line. Okay, that is sorry, this is the, I would say, the amplitude. Okay, so here this is the 0th line, and this is with respect to time. Okay, not 0 but respect to time. So okay, maybe somewhat like this, just for example's sake. So it varies from 500 to 1200. So 500 is the minimum, here it is 500 newtons, and top one is 1200. This is the variation of the load. Okay, Though there are other more complex calculations with respect to how this will change or how frequent it is and the frequency and hertz. We will not bother about that. We will take it as a very simple problem where fluctuating loads are encountered. So there is a fluctuating load from 500 newtons to 1200 newtons. We will determine the wire diameter by taking tau yield point 690 and tau endurance as 300. To solve this problem, we have to take some equations which I have already used in the previous semester. That is, if you go to chapter 1, there are some equations where you discussed about what if there is a varying load, and also what is the relationship between tau yp and tau endurance. We have understood what is endurance limit also. So we'll make use of such equations. So first of all, we will find out. Okay, anything else to explain here? Okay, C is 6, that is one thing. N means here, N is equal to 1.3. Here it refers to factor of safety. Factor of safety. Okay, what is N? This is factor of safety. Now, we will calculate if 500 is the minimum load, or I can say F minimum, and 1200 is F maximum. So what about Fm, mean load? Mean load is F max plus F minimum by 2. We have used that in the previous semester, so I think it is you are familiar with that. And average load is F max minus F minimum by 2. So here these two equations, if you want to find out here in the data handbook, one is equation 11.16 F and one is 11.16 G. Okay, you can make a note. So Fm and Fa alternating, and this is the mean. Now with this in mind, okay, if you put this, so one is 500 plus 1200 plus 500 by 2. And this is 1200 minus 500 by 2. So two values you will get, F max and F minimum. So here it is
850.
correct. One is 850 and other one is 350.
350.
Yes. Okay. Now, what equations to use given that tau yp is 690 and tau endurance is 300?
So
Okay.
Soderberg equation.
Yes, yes. So if you remember chapter 2 in the data handbook. So equation, first let us understand the equation 2.19e, page 25 in your data handbook. You have used it in the previous semester. Tau ya, tau endurance plus tau m by tau yp must be equal to 1 by n. I think this should be capital N here so that we don't confuse it. Yeah. So, or is it small n? I think it's small n. No. We'll use whatever data and book gives, okay?
Small n, sir.
Small n, okay. Then we'll use small n itself. Yeah. So this was the equation in 11. This is in 2.19e, page 25. Now this is given, yp is given, tau endurance is given, fine. What about tau a and tau m? Now what you have here is the load, that is axial load acting on the spring. You have to convert an equivalent load in tau a and tau m respectively. So the shear part of it, okay, what is the shear acting on the on that particular spring? Now for that you need to use the equations. Okay, tau m, actually it is not straight away written here, it is slightly modified form, 8 fm d k suffix s I'll put. Okay, I'll explain this, what is that, pi d cube, and tau a will be 8 fa d This is K. In other words, our normal use of wall stress correction factor divided by pi d cube. Now, what is the difference between this S, K suffix S and simply K? Or in some textbooks, it is also called KW. Okay, in the meantime, I'll give the equation number. This is both are modified forms of 11.1D. Okay, under repeated fluctuating load. Okay, page 169. So there we can make use of this equation tau m and tau a. Remember, tau m is related to the mean stress, okay, and tau a to the alternating load, that is Fa. Now I think one small discussion is left over here. Maybe we have not taken that. What is that K suffix S? I'll just have to do a small discussion here. See, if there was a spring, okay, single, no concentric and whatever complications are not there, a simple spring. So when the load was applied on this spring, it was subjected to two kinds of stress. That was showed in a graph, how the stress will vary. For example, if you enlarge it, the cross section, then cross section of the wire, then you'll have somewhat like this. One variation is like this, and resultant is somewhat like this, and so on. So this was the shear stress that was involved in the spring. Now, what is the, how did we get this graph? See, there are two stresses here. One is the torsional shear stress. We know that the spring is made of the wire. Okay, spring is made of the wire. So a very long thin wire. It is equivalent to holding it on one end and providing a torsion at the other end. So this gives rise to tau T, or torsional shear stress, plus due to direct application of the load F, this F is at any given moment of time is passing through the cross section of the wire. So this is a kind of direct shear stress, which we call tau F. Okay, so tau T is torsional shear, and this we call as direct shear. So direct shear component, I think I just showed you by graph in one of the classes. So that I think it was something like this. Yeah, you might remember this. Class 1 or class 2, I am not very sure. But yeah, I definitely remember putting up these graphs. So tau F. So this is torsional shear stress, this is direct shear. So these equations are here. Torsional shear stress is 8Fd by pi d cube, and tau F is 4F by pi d square. Now, if I separate out the terms, it is 1 plus 1 by 2d by d. In other words, I'll get 1 plus 1 by 2c, and this is the spring index value we recognized. And this tau max came out to be K suffix x into 8Fd by pi d cube. Maybe if you have already discussed this, you can just ignore it. But what I'm trying to tell here is, this is without wall stress correction factor. In other words, without curvature. So this one is without curvature effect. And the one which we use for wall stress correction factor, 4c minus 1, 4c minus 4, 0.615 by c, is, this is with curvature effect. Okay, that difference, it is important to understand. One is without curvature effect. We are not taking into consideration how tight is the curvature. Okay, and this is with curvature effect. So this is generally called as wall correction factor. Okay, given by the researcher Wall. And this is a normal thing, that is, if we are not considering the curvature effect about how the spring has been manufactured, we will go with 1 by 1 plus 2c. So in this problem, you have to use both. The reason being, this is K suffix S over here, and this is K over here. Okay, for the mean stress, we multiply it with a direct shear component, or you can say without curvature effect, and tau A is always multiplied with the wall stress correction factor, or the with curvature effect. So putting the values here, this is 8 into 850, D is Not given. So what we can do is, of course, d by d both we don't know, but we know what is 6. So I can write 6d. Okay, k suffixes we have to find out here. So 1 plus 1 by 2c. So I think it will come out to be 1.08. Just check the values. When c is 6, then k is always 1.2525. We have used that formula every time, so I'll directly write it here. So you'll get an equation of d square here, so you have to solve for that. Similarly for tau a, which is 350 newtons, okay, 6d, this is 1.2525 by pi d k. So d square, d square. So you should get something by d square here, some number by d square. Tau a part, just do the calculations and let me know. 6697.87 here. This you can give me. There is some confusion here. Okay. 14 something.
14069.
069. Okay. 0.29. Then this is fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now put it back in the equation. Once you have got these two equations, substitute it in this. So, okay, let me taken this down, or I'll simply try to write here. 069.29 by d square into sigma tau en, which is 300. Unit is, yeah, no changes, plus tau m. Oh, okay, I think I made a mistake here. This is what happens. Yeah, this is tau a, no? 6697.87. Tau m comes later, which is 14069.29 by d square into 1.3. So solving for d, then standard value.
$7.45.
Yes, good. 7.45. So standard value comes out to be 7.5. Just check it. Okay. Of course, the problem stops here only because determine the wire diameter is given. Further, if they say design, from here you continue with the usual calculation. Of course, some more information might be given in that case. Maybe deflection might be given and so on. So that is for 500 how much, and for 1200 how much, and so on. So this is how you adjust it for taking the fatigue loading, okay, alternating stresses. So from the exam point of view, similar things or a combination of things also might be given. Maybe we have taken valve opening and closing. So with that in mind, a valve opening and closing, that one problem we have done. If you combine them with this, then there is a combination of two problems. So that also might be possible. Okay, so whatever it is, reading the data initially, whatever assumptions you are doing, that will be should be very appropriate. Then the problem will be defined properly. Okay, fine. I think we can wind up with helical springs over here. We'll go to one more type of a spring. We'll see how much time permits now. Yeah. So we'll come to the next topic of leaf springs. So whenever we say leaf springs, this is the image that usually comes to our mind. So it is a set of leaves which are packed together by some bolts and attached to an automobile. And it is not only to just an automobile on the road, that is on the figure on the left that you can see over here. It is also that some old railway wagons used to have that kind of a springs. Okay, and of course nowadays this is mostly replaced by helical compression springs. So we don't go much further beyond this particular arrangement now. But in order to simply understand it, leaf springs can be described as a pack of leaves in the sense metallic leaves which are stacked on one top of the other. And one peculiarity in design is that those leaves are simply cut into different sizes. So one is the biggest one from full length, then it is slightly cut and then slightly cut and cut and cut again. So we'll understand the importance of it today, why that is done, and also what are the different nomenclatures associated with this leaf spring. Okay, so compared to helical springs, what is the advantage? One of the biggest advantages that a leaf springs has is that it is a very high load carrying capacity in a very short space. When you compare the space or the volume that is required for helical springs, the same work can be achieved by these leaf springs in a smaller amount of space. So you will never find leaf springs where it is very delicate suspension or very low light or low payload suspension. Leaf springs are always used for very heavy load suspension. Okay, in fact any leaf springs of any automobile, for a truck for example, if we can say that in order to deflect even an mm, it would require a tonnage of load. Okay, only then it will start deflecting. So that high is the stiffness. So definitely used for bigger vehicles, bigger load carrying capacity, and also bigger deflections. If you were to replace that same set by helical springs, then it would be more costly and also it would take a large amount of volume when compared to the leaf springs itself. So here we know that though the lengthwise it is quite large, but it is very narrow, or you can say very thin compared to the helical spring itself. Whereas helical springs, to place it over here, you require a very large volume. Okay, so that is one advantage that we have. So let us go to the history of leaf springs. I mean, not history in the terms of who invented it and such. We will go to how the leaf spring concept is understood. So I have taken this picture from your own data handbook. If you open figure 11.10, beams with a rectangular section is being discussed. Okay, figure 11.10 in chapter 11 itself in springs. So there you can just understand this figure. See, any plate for that matter, a cantilever beam for that matter, can act as a spring. See, this one is just fixed at one end to the left end, and to the right end you apply a force with a certain length and with a certain dimension. Of course you will get some dimension, some deflection over here. Okay, deflection obviously being the maximum at the end here because it is a cantilever beam. So you may get a profile something like this. So this will be the total deflection of the this constant cross section spring over here. Okay, so this also is essentially a spring. The second one also acts as a spring, but what happens? See, this is an orthographic view. This is the front view and this is the top view. Okay, this is the front view and this is the top view of the same section. So looking from the front, it still appears the same way. It has some certain thickness, but when you look from the top, what happens here? When you look from the top, you understand that it is not a constant width. It is of a variable width. So this particular spring is of a variable width, but you keep the thickness constant. Now you might ask, what is this? What is the advantage of using such a spring? This spring, or simply a plate kind of a spring, is called uniform strength spring, which is totally absent over here. We do not know. Definitely we can understand that this is not an uniform strength. Why we can say that? As discussed, the deflection here is quite big. In fact, I could say delta is max over here, the largest one. Whereas as you go in, if you say track the deflection over here, it may be somewhat lesser, or half of it, 50% of it. So as you move from the fixed end to the other end, your deflection increases. That means the strength is different at different places. You may have the least strength here be owing to maximum deflection, and the maximum strength over here at the fixed part of it. But here we talk about uniform strength. So what we do here is vary the cross section in such a way that the deflection on this spring is constantly varying. Sorry, deflection in the sense the deflection will be the same here. Sorry. Why? Because you see, though the thickness is the same, the area available, for example, at the root we have the width as b, whereas somewhere over here you have only half of it, and finally at the tip it is almost 0. Okay, so such beams are called beams of uniform strength. We can do one more variation here in type C, where the width you keep constant, but the thickness you vary. We are keeping b as the same, but varying h here. So in first case, what happens? B and h are constant throughout the length. In the second case, h is same, constant, but b is varying. And in the third case, b is same, h is varying. So this also constitutes a beam of uniform strength. If I just give you some of the equations here, and you can later look into that, that is those equations are also found in your data handbook. Okay, in relation to this 11.10 ABC, you have different equations. So I'll just discuss a few of them here so that you'll be able to understand. See, this particular beam, the constant cross section here, if you look at it in 3D view, how does it appear? Okay, constant cross section. So this is B, this is H. Okay, continued from elsewhere. So it's the same thing. Whereas here it is pointed, totally pointed. Okay, so it would look somewhat like this. Okay. If I use delta max for this, okay, if I write the equation over here, what should be the delta max? Yeah, hold on a moment. Yes. So we know that sigma is equal to my by I, and I is equal to bh cube by 12. We know the very basic bending equation. So what about sigma max over here? Suppose say for type A, I'm concentrating on type A now. Very simple. We know this is F into L by bh cube into h by 2 into 12. Okay, adjusting all of the things, I'm going to get this, and the final equation will be 6FL by bh square. On similar terms, delta max will be 4FL by EBH cube. Okay, so this will be the equation of the constant cross-sectional beam. Okay, similarly, what happens here is of B, constant cross-section here, constant thickness and uniform strength, you will have sigma is equal to F into L. Sorry, I'll directly write the equation. I will on similar lines, if I do the, all those equations are found in your data handbook, so no issues. We are not discussing the derivation part of it, we are just discussing how sigma and delta will vary according to different types of beams here. So sigma will be 6FL by BH square again, and this value is termed to be, the stress will be constant throughout. Okay, stress will be constant throughout the section of the beam. So that is for B here, and this is for A. Okay, for A this is valid. Okay, now notice that these three beams are of the same type, that is, though their width and height will vary, but all three are of cantilever type. One of the examples I can give you here is, but this particularly this kind of a beam, constant cross section, you may or may not have noticed. So you know, in swimming pools there is a jump board. So a person stands over here, pushes himself down a little bit, and then jumps into the water. So this is an example of a constant cross sectional beam. Okay, maybe there are other examples also in smaller devices, smaller applications also. Just for a reference sake, I took up that example. But what if you use a constant cross section here in a different kind of support, that is using a simply supported arrangement? Okay, of course there is a sagging over here, the maximum deflection will come at the center over here, with particularly if F is placed at a distance of L when the total length is 2L, exactly at the center you'll get the maximum deflection. So similarly, if you use a different beam, so that is double of this, you will get B as this particular shape. Okay, this shape is called lozenge shape. Okay, I'll just write it here. Lozenge. Okay, lozenge shape, and I think some toffees have that name, lozenges they call. Okay, because it resembles this shape. Okay, this shape is called as a lozenge shape. Anyway, so here what happens? What happens to the condition here? Here, if I take this particular example, okay, let me write some equations over here, just help us to understand what happens. See, sigma max will be equal to 3FL by BH square will come, and delta max will be 3FL cube by EBH cube. So these are some of the terms, that is both the stress and the deflection equation associated with this. Okay, now in order to keep this under control, say sigma max you want to bring it under control, then what should be there? In order to reduce sigma max, okay, we should have these components as what? The denominator should be, that is especially B and H square, this should be as high as possible. We totally agree with that. Okay, but at the same time, if I isolate it for B and H, what will happen? See, for example, B should be equal to 3FL by sigma H square. Okay, maybe it is max or whatever, or a design stress, 3FL by sigma max H square. I am just rewriting the equation. In order to have, see, sigma max relation and B is inverse of it, each other. H, even if you give a smaller thickness, it is sufficient enough. But what about B? Now B is one big dimension. In order to have a uniform strength, what is the condition is, B should be considerably large. B should become considerably large. There is one more variation also, you can vary H, but that is going to be more complicated. But the simplest way we can adjust this is using a B with quite large dimensions. But having said that, this lozenge shape itself is a very impractical one. For example, the vehicle has some tonnage of payload capacity. Now we cannot imagine to have a spring looking from the top, say this is the top view, looking from the top, okay, you are attaching something here, okay, maybe a big wheel, okay, and bigger than the wheel you need to have a suspension system, okay, bigger than the wheel, the size wise, okay, dimension wise, you may need to have a suspension system. We know that the point is simply supported because it has to be simply supported on either side, okay, either side it has to be attached to the chassis of the vehicle, and you are putting the tire in between exactly at the center, so it becomes a very impractical design. So how to go around this problem, how to make it more compact, or find a spring which is similar both in terms of manufacture and also giving uniform strength. So this is our idea, how to get an uniform strength. If you don't get an uniform strength, then there will be stress concentration at some point very high and it will simply fail. And also it is not good for the load carrying of any kind of such capacity. So how to go around this problem? So what we have to do is, in order to restrict this B, but also not to sacrifice this uniform strength, we have an idea, that is this one. So this same lozenge shape B, this is B which we are talking about now, which is giving us a problem. Okay, say you keep H constant, then only thing you should modify B, but B you cannot make it very large. It is a very impractical design. So what you can do, strip them into different sets, okay, strip them into equal lengths or different sets, okay. Now the equation is slightly changed. See, sigma max, if you want to see, it is I can say, if it is for a simple beam, it is 3FL by NBH square. NBH square. What is this NB? You had earlier only B, but what is this NB? NB means N is number of strips. Okay, number of strips. And this formula is valid for simply supported. Okay, I'll write SS. Okay, simply supported. Cantilever, you will have a slightly different response, but we'll take it as simply supported as of now. When we discuss the different types of equations in the design data handbook, that I think that time we can look further into it. So, so you have N is number of strips and B becomes the breadth of each and every piece. Okay, B becomes the breadth of or width of every strip. So what happens here is, instead of having a very large dimension of a plate, a lozenge shaped plate, we cut the plate down into various amount of strips, preferably of equal width. Okay, for example, width number 1 is equal to width number 2 combined, and 3 combined, and 4 combined, and we stack on top of one after the other, and this gives rise to something called a laminated spring. Notice that the shape is still straight here. We'll come to the curvature later. This is a laminated spring, or also called multi-leaf spring. Okay, not a single leaf or multi-leaf spring. And this is how we get that graduated leaves. Okay, this is the full length leaves, full size, and this is the graduated or cut to one of the certain sizes. There is one more reason why these are graduated in nature. Okay, we'll come to that. So coming to the shape part of it, now it is all pointed over here. Okay, it is all pointed. Even if you cut these pieces also, it all becomes pointed over here. Individual pieces are pointed. So rather it look from the top view, it looks somewhat like this. Okay, this is the front view again. Now top view is somewhere over here. Now it looks somewhat like this. But this is also not good for strength handling. What happens is, maybe you have uniform strength till here, but then again there is stress concentration, and nobody will keep a huge tonnage of load pointed at one end, right? And there is no facility for it to be tightened against the chassis. So we can start rounding it off. Okay, why to take the risk? We'll start rounding it off. But most practical method is just keep it square type. Okay, just keep it square type, and this is how we are using this particular type now. Okay, so what did we do here? What is the overall thing, our justification of this discussion? what we have done is we have chosen a beam which can give us uniform strength, but it is impractical to use a lozenge shape. We know that the response will be of uniform strength, and the only way to control the response of the beam being uniform strength, the only way to control the dimension is adjust this B part. Okay, adjust this B part, because if you go to adjust H, it is again one more complicated thing. Of course, you can do with a less complicated B with the uniform width, but you look at what happens to the thickness, and it has to be accurately machined and whatsoever. So this is again going to be a very bad thing. So, but you understand one thing, that whatever we have done, it is a cross of this and this, correct? So the beam also looks like this. Okay, simply supported, and the H part is varying. So what we have done, we have taken this lozenge part and simulated it to become a, again, a uniform strength variable thickness beam by keeping the width constant. Okay, so that is the beauty of the construction of a laminated spring. Manufacturing wise also, it is very impractical to have one single plate, uniform width plate with the varying cross section. It is a very tedious process. Okay, and one other thing is there, say suppose say this breaks. Okay, practically speaking, if if there is one fracture here, the entire spring is gone. Whereas here in laminated springs, even if one fails, okay, of course we will not get 100% of the spring action, it will not take 100% of the weight, but for the time being it will certainly handle some kind of load until it is getting replaced. Okay, so those are some of the advantages of using leaf springs, and we saw from equation wise also, theory part wise also, how it is practical for us to adjust this B rather than adjusting L or H or any other particular parameter. Depending on whether how you are understanding this equation, whether it is a simple beam or cantilever beam. So this is of a simply supported beam. If you are using a cantilever beam, okay, cantilever beam approach, then the same thing can be written as sigma max equal to this is 6, okay, 6 FL by NBH square. Okay, this is all available in the table. We'll use it whenever the problem requires of it. Okay. Let us go next. Let us discuss a few things about materials of the leaf springs. From which materials the leaf spring is made of? One is the plain carbon steel, that also can be used. Usually used as chrome vanadium steel. So this is a very important material for us. Chrome vanadium steel is the maximum or most widely used steel, and we saw the use of this chrome vanadium even in helical springs also. Chrome nickel molybdenum, again a good alloy, we can use that, and silicon manganese steel is also available to us. Some of the standard sizes of the leaf springs are like from 25 to 80 mm in steps of 5 mm each. So again, just as helical springs, you have a variation, that is you have to set the spring to a predefined value, and thickness is from 2 to 8 in steps of 1 mm and 10 to 16 mm in steps of 2 mm. So these are some of the standard sizes of the leaf springs that are available. Now, in actual practice, that is practically, what do people do? The theory part, we have understood that it is more essential for us to put leaves one below the other, and also vary the thickness H, that is thickness of the entire set of the springs, in order to get uniform strength. Now, in actual practice, what we have noticed that the first leaf gets usually the maximum tension, okay, or maximum loading. So obviously, because it is the one which is attached to the chassis, it is also bigger, so definitely there will be more stress. Now how to take care of that? Okay, how to receive that stress? So what they do is they add few more additional full length leaves below the master leaf, okay, for heavy loads. So if you notice here, yeah, here in this particular figure, and both these figures actually, You have one full length leaves over here, this one, and the second one is added over here. Okay, so in order to handle the full amount of load, so first one and the second one, first we call as the master leaf, the second one is either a full length leaf or a graduated leaf. When we say graduated, that means it is already cut to a certain length. Okay, so below the master leaf for heavy loads, we use additional more full length leaves. The value of stress do not change. Equation wise, the value will not change. But what happens to the deflection? Deflection equation requires a correction, maybe assumed to be 10 to 15% less than that of given by basic equation. See, when you stack up like this, one over the other, the deflection that is observed in individual spring taken separately is different from the deflection that is observed together as a pack of leaves. So definitely the deflection is assumed to be slightly lesser in practice when compared to what the actual equations give. Some of the stresses due to support hinges. Okay, where are the support hinges? We will go back here. So this is the support hinge which we are talking about. Okay, here this is the pin that we were talking about. These are the support hinges that is connected to the chassis. So there are stresses also due to this supports. What are those? Due to longitudinal forces, we have, that is front and back. Okay, the vehicle is moving and say there is a motion like this. So there is a stress due to this longitudinal motion, and possibility of stresses arising due to twist. So what happens is this has to be loosely fit here. You cannot tightly fit here, and due to that, what happens when there is suspension action, it may be subjected to a little bit of torque. So twisting action might also be there. Okay, so twisting action might also be there. Because of that, this plate or these leaves will try to flex. So there are some possibility of stresses arising due to the twist. How we can reduce the stresses? So there are three methods that are used. One is the master leaf is made stronger material than other leaves. This also can be used. Okay, so majority of the load is carried by the master leaf itself, and that is why we need not worry about the smaller leaves. So smaller leaves being more delicate when compared to the master leaf, will because master leaf is taking off more load, then the smaller ones will easily handle the load. The second one is master leaf is thinner than other leaves. Okay, master leaf is made thinner than the other leaves, so that the stresses on it will be slightly reduced. But these two are comparatively less practical methods. These two are comparatively less practical methods. Okay, master leaf being longer, okay, it is longer, but this is a little bit lesser practical method when implemented in industries. So they go with the third one, which we call as radius of curvature. Radius of curvature of the master leaf is larger than the next leaf. Now you might say, what is the use? Okay, let me just hold on, I'll give you one more figure. Yeah. So this is a typical semi-elliptical spring. Now we discussed only about a straight part. Why this curvature is required? See, first of all, we'll discuss why radius of curvature is required. Smaller or greater, that we'll see later. Radius of curvature is required because, see, this is a mean position, zeroth position, also called camber in respect to automobile. Now here, What if you had used a straight leaf? Okay, if you had used a very straight leaf, for example, like this, a very straight leaf. The moment you start loading, say this is a zero stress condition, then what happens? You will get a deflection like this. The final point is the deflection will be like this. Your weight will push it, or your forces will push it to be like this, which will create another extremity. Though there are zero stresses initially, once you apply the load, the stresses will be so high in the opposite direction. So this failure will be very high when compared to what this is. Now what happens when you actually manufacture it like this in the cold condition or unstressed condition? So unstressed condition, if you already have a radius of curvature, when you load it, say for example here the loading is given as 2p. We will come to the equations part in the next class, but let us see what happens here. So the most maximum thing that you can get is the leaf will become straight. So loading in only one direction. Otherwise here what happens is the loading will start in the opposite direction. So if it is like this, then oppositely it will be loaded. Inner side it will be huge compressive stress and outside will be huge tensile stresses, and there is the possibility of high failure. Okay, flexing is also more, whereas here it may be like this. Okay, initially, so fully unstressed condition, then slightly stressed, more stressed, and finally we can say this is the maximum that it can be stressed. So it will never move on to the other side or the other region itself. Now what about other leaves? Okay, let us come to this. Master leaf radius of curvature is larger than the next leaf. What is the meaning of this? See, when you manufacture it something like this in this condition, what we do is, say this is the original unstressed condition of the master leaf. Okay, master leaf. The other leaf, sorry, the other leaf is made like this. What is the difference now? This has more radius of curvature, say R1, and this is of a lesser radius of curvature, R2. Here R1 greater than R2. And this continues for other leaves also. R3 again will be lesser radius of curvature. Now what is the use? What is the use of having these radius of curvatures like this? These radius of curvatures ensure that the leaves are pre-stressed in the opposite direction. The leaves will become pre-stressed in the opposite direction. For example, see, you put all those leaves together and this is the U-bolt. This is the one which is keeping it everything together. Okay, very important piece, the U-bolt part. So this U-bolt or pin will keep everything together, okay, stacked up. In initial condition, yes, unstressed condition, this has a different R1, this has a this different radius of curvature R2, sorry, this is a different radius of curvature R3. So when you put this bolt and tighten them together by using bolt and nut arrangement, they'll all come together and stay in one particular shape, of course with some radius of curvature. But in the process, what would have happened? This would have got a different stress and this would have got a different stress. So this is forcing it to get still smaller radius of curvature, and this leaf is forcing this to get larger radius of curvature. The interaction between these two ensures that all the leaves are stressed properly or equally stressed throughout. Okay, equal stress. Then we can say the entire leaf spring arrangement or the elliptical spring arrangement will behave as a uniform strength beam. That is one part. Secondly, this camber is maintained. Okay, this line we will see that whatever the stressing is there, it will come till here and then rebound back. It will not go to the other side, giving undue stresses on the spring itself. Okay, and this gap, it is called nip, NIP. Okay, this gap between these two leaves is called as nip. So nip is essentially the gap that is purposely made. Okay, Our original idea or just immediate idea may be to manufacture all the leaves in the same radius of curvature, but it is not the correct procedure. You have to make of a different radius of curvature so that they balance out each other, and see that this bending moment is adjusted for all the leaves so that uniform strength beam is obtained, and also there is sufficient gap for it to perform that deflection. Sufficient gap, not taking it to the other side. Okay, sufficient gap to perform that deflexive action or suspension action is to be given over here. And also it is very good from the point of view of manufacture also. Okay, so you simply bolt them together, tighten it, they will all stay in place, all equally stressed. What is the advantage of using equally stressed leaves? See, if you use everything of the same radius of curvature, then what will happen? Of course, all will take part in the suspension, but the load distribution will be different. For example, the last one will get least amount of, you may get sigma minimum here and you may get sigma maximum here, which is not at all proper. The whole leaf, the whole system may fail. Once this is gone, master leaf is gone, there is nothing to hold it. Correct? Rather, we would like to have arrangement wherein no matter whatever the load, all the springs will share in taking up the load. All the springs will take in sharing the load. Okay, all the springs will be equally stressed, everyone is equally responsible. Okay, so that not one is highly stressed or there is no stress concentration occurring. Strictly speaking, yes, at this notches around there is stress concentration and we cannot avoid that, but given the entire system of leaf, we would like to see that there is no stress concentration in the entire arrangement. So this is one very important concept, the radius of curvature. Why then such a springs is called semi-elliptic laminated springs. The earlier straight ones you can simply call it multi-leaf springs, but this is semi-elliptic. Okay, why they are rounded off? Because of this nature, that is a flexing nature. It should come and give a mean position over here, not go to the other side. If you directly give mean beforehand, it will go to the other side and flex in the wrong direction. So whenever the flexing is there, when you apply the load, you should try to flatten out, and that is when you get the maximum spring action. When you go to the other side, it may begin to even buckle, okay, or give rise to undue stresses. Okay, so this is the reason why springs are made curved, and also we saw why this difference of R1, R2, R3 and so on is maintained. Okay, more about this, and maybe I can say what will, for example, what is the stress on this master leaf? I just now asked sigma max here and told maybe there is a sigma minimum here. Okay, how to adjust these two? So that part along with the derivation, we'll look it up in the next class, in the following classes.
So
yeah.
So can you go to the slide that has standard dimensions of the leaf spring?
Standard dimensions? Here, this one is it? Yeah.
No, the standard dimension that mentions 25 to 80 in 5 millimeter steps.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Of course, we are not going to use this particular thing. This is just for extra information I put it. We are going to use a table in our data handbook when we design. Okay.
Sir, I'm just noting it down.
Yeah.
Done, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is all that we can discuss for today. So next class we will continue with what are the different stresses, how to equalize them. One, what we saw is R1, R2, R3 and so on, and we are trying to prove that really this is sigma max and this is sigma minimum. In other words, what is the difference between the stresses in the master leaf or full length leaves, and what is the difference between the graduated leaves. Okay, so this is a typical arrangement of a semi-elliptic spring. More on this we'll discuss in the next class. Okay, I think you can wind up with this.